Hey, White Sox fans. My name is Brett Ballantini. I'm lucky enough to host Southside Sox on the Farm podcast. This is number 23. I didn't actually think I'd be talking to this guy in the Mets hat. If you're watching the Mets hat, I didn't think I'd be talking to him for this one, but Sean Williams, even though he wrote, and it's linked in the post for this podcast, he wrote the Arizona Complex League season review, was not able to join us for a podcast. So even though I said all those sweet things about you last time, the Canapolis podcast, Darren, I have to take them all back now? And maybe we have to roll those credits back out in another couple of podcasts because you're back. But you're just your thing that wouldn't leave, thing wouldn't die. You are back for more. You're going to do the full run of all 5 of these season review podcasts, plus a bonus. So welcome back, Darren. You know, if you watch these, you might not believe it. Darren, great friend of mine, let's face it, my roommate, great friend. You were don't let his youthful good looks betray you. You were what? You were 1 or 2 classes ahead of me. Both graduated from Libertyville High School, suburban Chicago area. Yeah. You were a couple years. I remember you picking on me at the lockers. So 2 years, I think. Yeah. Well, at any rate, Darren, a couple years ahead of me, but from the same school. We go back, and clearly his expertise on the minor league system is rubbed off on me based on all the very intelligent comments and questions I have for him. So let's jump right into it. We're going to do a 2-team thing. Still might not go very long, Darren. We're going to go rookie league. So we are going to start in Arizona, the Arizona Complex League. White Sox finished 25-34, 14 games behind whoever the first place team was. 13th best team out of 18. I was hoping like Arizona was actually pretty okay, but they're really not very good either. No. The fact that they were only 9 games below 500 is like a big achievement for a White Sox minor league team this year. But there were some fairly significant breakout players, or at least some guys that would catch some attention. It seems like maybe more with bats. But maybe give me a couple of bats in your mind who really distinguished themselves, whether they were like legitimately promoted in the season or not. Guys you sort of have your eye on.
Yeah, sure. So there are probably a couple. I'll keep the draft pick guys outside of this. But Misael González, he was legitimately promoted just because of how well he was doing. He just kept hitting extra base hits, kept hitting homers. Yeah. And eventually he finally got promoted. He wasn't there very long. Unfortunately, when he got to Canapolis, he wasn't as fantastic, and you probably could have seen why that was. But the power didn't leave when he went to Canapolis. Just strictly speaking, in Arizona, he had 11 extra base hits compared to 12 singles, which is fantastic.
That's pretty good.
5 of those were homers, which is also fantastic. His main problem is he just strikes out a lot. I know everyone strikes out, but he does that more than normal. Yeah. At least 1 a game, which isn't fantastic for a guy that relies on power and doesn't really walk much. But he's also 20, so got a lot of years to go. Next season will be big for him, since it will be his kind of, I guess, first real professional season, since he's gonna probably start in Canapolis in April playing baseball. Usually, in Arizona, you start in, I think this year was June, a week or 2 after or before the draft, something like that. So next year will be his first big real season. So a lot to look forward there. And then Wilfred Veras was just a surprising guy, overall, that he was even in the ACL to begin with. And he crushed it. I guess he didn't crush it. He relied a lot more on gap power than normal power, though he did have a decent ISO at over 200. He batted 322 WRC plus in the 140s. He is only 18, so that's pretty significant. Concerning thing is a really high BABIP, and he does get a lot of singles, so we'll just kind of see how that goes going forward. Because he's so young, I'm not really sure where he's going to start next year. He could easily start in the ACL again, just to kind of prove that he's actually was as good as he was. But he also just might be in the ACL or in Canapolis next year too, because there's not really anybody keeping him in a spot at kind of like a corner infield.
And
kind of thing.
what was nice about Veras too, in addition to the fact he just want the hell out of the ball, is that when after the draft, when Kath came aboard, it seemed like, again, this isn't the most challenging move, but he went from being a third baseman to first base. He seemed to hold those positions, but not nobody fields well, I guess, in Arizona, but it seemed competent. And for a guy who, I guess, though he is a very large man, considers third base his natural position, just good to know you can move across the diamond and not have it at least affect your bat. Two big bats. In Gonzalez's case, Darren, he's a guy, I think we've talked about a few others this year who have done this. He's a guy who sort of played his way sort of back into maybe a little more serious contention with all the with all the negatives that might still be attached to him. He's sort of back in the picture where, even though still very young, he was on the fringe, or maybe he had drifted out of it before this season.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is just really because he was drafted out of high school 2019. Again, there was no season next year. I'll repeat that like 30 more times. So he didn't really have that extra year to like prove it. I don't really consider when you're drafted and then go play as like really truly a barometer of what the type of player you might be. Because it's probably the longest you've ever played baseball in a year, and probably the most you've ever played baseball in a year. So we kind of look for that second season to see what you're doing. And he kind of proved that here. I don't know if he's going to be ranked in the top 30s necessarily, because he was like pretty bad in Kannapolis. But next year is just going to be big in general, just to kind of separate him from, are you a guy that maybe we can watch in the future, which was the guy he was in the ACL, or are you the guy that was in kind of low A? Are you just kind of like a lesser Bryce Bush? You're just going to kind of do well against your own peers and then not really continue going forward. So next year will be big for him.
Let's get to the draft picks in a second, at least the hitting draft picks. Darren, let's share. It'll probably be old news by now, but maybe some of you are otherwise distracted by the great professional basketball team in town and the horrific professional hockey team in town, and maybe are just not keeping up with baseball as much as you usually are. We did just get word this evening that, I believe, fifth rounder, at any rate, 2021 draft choice, Tanner McDougal, who showed out pretty decently, I think, in Arizona. Definitely was a guy they felt was really key to taking it from being maybe a good or an average draft to a really good one by inking him. Unfortunately injured, has Tommy John surgery, will very likely miss 2022, a setback the White Sox didn't need, in particular because their lower level arms, aside from the guy we're going to talk in the second half of this podcast, Darren, are sort of weak. But Tanner did have a pretty strong Arizona season. I guess another guy, Tommy Summer, sort of did pretty well coming right into things, but arms-wise, Arizona wasn't exactly the place.
No, and I mean, it really wasn't, because Sean Burke, I think it was their highest draft pick, actually was promoted to Kannapolis after like a few innings, because he was actually out of college. The rest of the guys were out of high school, so they're obviously not going to move much. I guess Tanner McDougal might have not moved much for a different reason, but he is young, so he'll miss a season, and we'll see where he's at in 2023. I think that's how math works. Yeah. So I think just kind of put that in the back of your brain. We'll see how it goes. But it's mostly about the hitting with this draft now, that he is going to miss a whole entire year.
Darren, I laugh. I think you laugh too, at how bad, this system's records. Because let's face it, when the team was not in its so-called window of contention the way it is now, it's not like the system was like great either record-wise. And I know records don't matter, but again, records, they keep them. They actually declare a winner and a loser. But what I want to know, Darren, is, I mean, I understand that in a way it's sort of like it's a rigged question when I say like, geez, there wasn't much pitching in Arizona. Because you're right. You point out that Burke gets moved up very quickly because he's right. He clearly can handle the competition in Arizona. So you want to get him up to a level that he's going to be challenged, not crushed by. Right. So I get that in a way the system is built so that there's always going to be this sort of strange churn going on where it's like, you don't want your team to be too good at the expense of the rest of your system. But on the other hand, Darren, I mean, we look at the Tampa Rays this year, who had perhaps the best minor league organizational season maybe ever, especially now that everything is sort of equal, even though the White Sox still choose to field less teams than they could and all that. There's not a lot of range. This isn't like the Cardinals when they had 600 minor league teams, and maybe the White Sox then were only, fielding 5 in the 50s or something. An equal playing field, and Tampa, I presume, pushes guys like Burke up when they deserve to be pushed up as well. The White Sox seem to rarely ever have the depth that says, yeah, we can take as many hits and there's just going to be another guy coming up. I understand at a certain point, you can only field 26 guys in your major league team. So at a certain point, it's just like weird trophies on your shelf. But at the same time, are we ever going to have a system like this, Darren? Are we ever going to just be able to say, just plug a new guy in because this system is that intense and that talented?
Yeah. I'm not sure, because obviously when they were doing the let's try to win every year, they would their first round draft picks would either just not work out, or they just trade them, or their young guys would be on the major league team like Marcus Semien and they didn't like prove themselves quick enough and they were traded, which looks pretty bad now. Because now we all
different podcast.
But we're at this point where it's kind of like I'm never going to think the White Sox are going to be the Rays. I mean, they might have, like, Wander Franco might be the best player in baseball next season, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was. And the Rays just kind of found him. I know the White Sox don't go and find a lot of guys in the international draft pool, or not draft, prospect pool. I know they're signing more guys recently, but they're still trading some bonus space when necessary, though sometimes it's completely fine. Others, it's kind of worthless. They just want to get rid of a contract, so they'll include some international prospect money just for whatever. But they really haven't been hitting in their drafts recently. And for the most part, during the rebuilding window, they were drafting college guys to get up with their pretty older prospects that they just acquired, to get them on the same schedule, which makes complete sense. Like, I don't really have a problem with them doing that, but they didn't, Jake Berger didn't work, or has not worked out until maybe now. We'll see. But Zach Collins and Zach Birdie is not even in the organization any longer. And then Nick Madrigal is not in the organization any longer. So you've got just kind of some big drawbacks. And we'll see. I mean, it might look a lot better if Gavin Sheets and Jake Berger are actually the players that they showed to be. Maybe we'll be rethinking that a bit. But now they're starting to draft more high schoolers. Tanner McDougal, unfortunately, was one of them. So that's going to be put on the back burner there. But Coulson Montgomery, Wes Kath, their top 2 picks are high schoolers. I think that's just going to be their trajectory for the next few years, because they don't need people. Right. I mean, obviously they have holes at second base. They need another starter. They need another reliever. But those are holes that you can plug and play in different ways.
It's not 26 open spots the way it's been.
Not any longer. They have very specific holes. So now they're just trying to make the organization just better as a whole. And it'll take a while. I really want them to sign. I mean, they'll get the top guys in the international draft pool out of Cuba, it seems like, all the time. But they just don't sign a bunch. You really use their money for 1 or 2 people and then trade away some of it they don't even want to spend. And I hope they change that. But it's a whole kind of a turnover of the system that's really starting to get younger now. And we'll kind of see how that works. But they might even trade some of their younger guys now to help the team now. So it's really, and that's the right move. I'm not going to fault them if they trade Coulson Montgomery next year to get a better guy at the deadline. That's not a bad idea. It's just they got to keep getting younger and younger and younger, and then there'll be waves after this core in the major league in the majors team is gone.
I mean, for all the ways that Ken Williams would get, sort of roundly, chortled out from the prospect crew. I mean, the name of the game is to have the best 26 guys on your major league team, and you don't get any sort of like a bonus, as much as I just sort of led with that weird question a few minutes ago. As much as it'd be nice to have all these teams doing well, instead of like trying to figure out who the worst of the worst of the worst is among all these teams, It'd be nice if you could settle somewhere in between there. And credit due, the White Sox did have an enormous number of first and second round draft choices, contributing to a 93-win team in the major leagues. That is the name of the game. We can pick on Zach Collins, but I guess he could. He was on the roster. He was good enough, good enough to be.
Yeah.
And when the team wins 73 games, you can say, well, this was this clown show. When it wins 93 games, you can say, okay, well, that they're doing what they were drafted to do. So I guess you sort of teased the direction the draft is going to be going maybe in the near future and did this year. And that is high school, in this case, high school bats. Coulson Montgomery, West Kath, both ended up holding up pretty well in Arizona, it seemed, justifying the faith the team has in them. Tell me a little about both of those guys. They seem like they've had a optimistic start to their White Sox careers.
Yeah, so I will start out and reiterate, if it's nice to see some bats confirm that they were drafted at this place, but I'm not going to hang a huge hat if they do poorly, or if one has an outstanding season. I'm not going to be like, this is call them up to AA next year right now. That's not how that works. But they both did their thing. West Kath showed decent pop, especially early. Later on, he just kind of started striking out a lot more than he was at the beginning of his tenure. But strikeouts were a concern of his, so that's kind of confirming the scouting report. But he will just have to work on them a ton. I think it was like over 2 a game, which is not good.
Yeah.
But he's 18, so just kind of got to get used to that and see if he improves each year. Coulson Montgomery, he was mostly just showing professional at bats. Like, he was getting on base almost 40% of his at bats, which is obviously awesome. He just wasn't showing any power at all, which is not going to be him in the future. Again, these guys have never played baseball into September, and they've never played as many games as they had until this point in their life. So I'm guessing that power is just kind of sapped by the end. But overall, it was promising. Coulson Montgomery much more so than West Kath, which is good. First round pick doing better than a lower round pick is what should happen. So looking forward to these two to see where they are next year. Hopefully both Kannapolis, and then we'll see how they go from there.
We're going to table my guy, my Jose Rodriguez for 2021, Terrell Tatum. We're gonna table talk about him because let's talk about one guy who really, and we've alluded to him already because I think we maybe spoke on him a little bit with Kannapolis. And I suppose we'll put it in some extra focus with the second half of this rookie podcast, talking DSL, but a guy who was a monster in the DSL, which made it seem like a guarantee he was going to find great success, untouchable in trade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Benjamin Bailey failed with the aggressive assignment and then really did not bounce back and recover at all in Arizona. And where does this guy go? Is there a way that they're going to just try to scrub his memory of 2021 so he can just come back fresh 2022?
Yeah, I mean, that's what you really have to do at this point, because he really was just not good. I know Kannapolis definitely seemed like too hard of an assignment. I know they were probably expecting a lot more of him just because of how great he was in the DSL, showed great plate discipline, and that just disappeared. I'm really curious to see with a lot of these young guys how they do like a year after playing baseball after the pandemic, coming off of no routine whatsoever and kind of getting back into I'm a professional, this is my job, kind of a routine in the off season. But he got demoted from Kannapolis. He showed better plate discipline. He walked more, but he still struck out 30% of the time in the Arizona Complex League, which is not, he's better than that. He should not have a 30% K rate in the ACL. Even if he's 19, we thought he was better than that. Again, he's got all the tools, 6'4", 180. He could be a monster if he can, or 200. He could be a monster if he's actually gets it all together. But out of any of the guys that did poorly this year, he's the most frustrating, and he probably should be downgraded the most just because he was bad.
Yeah.
Not to sugarcoat it.
We're going to see the effect of it most extremely, or we did see it this season the loss of the Pioneer League is, I imagine the minor leagues are going to adjust to not having that step, which was really a key step. You're going from glorified pony league. I know that's excessive, but in Arizona, and you're going from whatever DSL is, which is just really like feeling your way through being a professional player, to then full season ball in Kannapolis, which is still low A, but this full season ball, travel, a culture issue that isn't even the same in the complex in Arizona. Missing that step, not that Montana was like some great relief, but in terms of what the competition level was, I mean, that seemed to be like the half step that would really benefit a lot of players. Bailey is probably the one guy that really stood out, not the only guy, but the one guy who really stood out as who might have really been as much as cold as he would have been up there in the mountains, would have really benefited from having an opportunity to at least start in a Pioneer League. Is this short-sightedness on the part of the major leagues in what they've done with the minor leagues? Will organizations, they'll have no choice but to adjust, but certainly some players and maybe organizations as a whole might not adjust, especially when you're talking about a White Sox team that they do not max out their minor league teams. They don't have they're not fielding maximum number of players. That can't be helping either.
Yeah, it's just a struggle to like analyze that, just because there wasn't a season last year. So I'm not sure if it's just True. They just didn't play. Because if there was a 2020, Benjamin Bailey probably starts in Great Falls if there was a Great Falls. And he probably in 2021 would have started in Kannapolis unless he did extremely well in 2020 and did a Jose Rodriguez and starts in Winston-Salem kind of deal. But I wish I listened to our first podcast or second podcast or whatever when we were analyzing like where everyone was placed. I know for a fact I said this was aggressive, but I really want to look back and see if I thought this was a bad idea or a good idea, because I think it's fine. The decision was fine to start the year, but he just was so bad. And I hope it doesn't wreck his confidence, because he did poorly in the Arizona Complex League too. He didn't kind of go there and do a Luis Maestas and do really well once he was demoted. Right. He kept on doing poorly, but still bad. Yeah. So his start next year is going to be very important, because I assume it's going to be in Kannapolis again. I guess I wouldn't be surprised if he starts in the ACL, but I'm assuming it's Kannapolis. And how he does early on is going to be pretty important, because it seems like once he's down, he's down. Doesn't get out of it.
I want to believe, Darren, that you had the exact right call in that very first Farm podcast, but you're wearing a Mets hat, and at risk of angering all our Mets White Sox fan, there's like there's a strong alliance there. At risk of angering them, that's not exactly backing that you made the right call early on. But anyway, we don't need to dig too deep into that. Hey, you know what? Even though this is the rookie leagues, we are going to squeeze in a commercial message. Sorry, everybody. You're going to have to wait a minute before we can get to the Dominican Summer League. Hold tight. We'll be back for a very brief discussion about the DSL in just a second. Hey, White Sox fans. It is Southside Sox on the Farm podcast. Oh my God, 23 podcasts, Darren. Can you believe it? You've been around for almost every one of them, and you're a better man for it. We talked in the first half. I don't think we'll call it a half, because it's going to be by far the majority chunk of this as we squeeze in a commercial late about the Arizona Complex League. Let's move on now, Darren, to the league that we really shoot more in the dark on than any other, because it's farthest away. They play all their games at like 6:30 in the morning. The White Sox, of course, easier to track because they only have one team, even though there are 46 teams in the Dominican Summer League. The White Sox field one of them. Yes, that is the Chicago White Sox, not the Omaha White Sox or the Denton, Texas White Sox. They were 26-33, basically a carbon copy of the Arizona Complex League, nearly the same record. They were 4th of 6 in their division. I believe they are tied with one of the 18 Cubs Dominican teams for 33rd best in the Dominican Summer League. So again, not a great season. We've seen worse. Darren, you remember worse. Worse was about a 5,800 season a couple of years back, but we've also seen better. Let's try not to just talk about Norje Vera, but it's hard pretty much not to just talk about Norje Vera, because by 2022, he is probably leapfrogged the triumvirate of arms in Kannapolis as probably by head and shoulders the best young lower arm in the system. What did the Dominican Summer League performance of his tell you, aside from the fact he completely outclassed the very, very young men playing in that league?
Well, I mean, I saw Twitter videos of him throwing high 90s, which is
not bad.
that's a takeaway. I don't really take away much from his season. Just,
sure.
It was 19 innings. I mean, he allowed 0 runs and struck out 50% of the batters he faced.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. I'm not an analyst, but that sounds pretty good.
But yeah, he was clearly better than his competition. It was kind of like a Luis Robert feel almost. I mean, no runs, 19 innings. So we just kind of crushed it. I'm assuming he's going to be in Winston-Salem because that's what Luis Robert did. Not that they're the same prospects, but kind of similar ages and crushed the DSL similarly. So hoping he's there in Winston-Salem. Yeah, I'm not sure if Jared Kelly, Andrew Dahlquist, or Matthew Thompson are going to get promoted. There's also not really much coming from the ACL now that Tanner McDougal is now hurt. Right. So not really anybody pushing them. But yeah, I mean, Norge Vera played well, and he looks good, but DSL is hard to take into once you get into American baseball, as we can see with Benjamin Bailey, as we talked about earlier.
Just imagine if they decide to play it a little conservative with Vera. And of course, probably I would think that these other 3 guys do have to repeat. I mean, they weren't even all fully healthy. So, I mean, you've got potentially a starting rotation in Kannapolis that, as much as they were ballyhooed last year and sort of failed, it's going to be even crazier. You add the diamond of the system into what is still 3 pretty promising arms. Certainly the White Sox are going to put a lot of pressure and hope on those guys. That would be a ridiculous starting rotation. I almost want to see it just for a couple of weeks, just to know it's like, holy cow, wow. Jared Kelly's your 4th starter. That's sort of insane. But okay. It's safe to say that because he just cut through the DSL like a knife through butter, he will be getting what you might consider on paper an aggressive assignment, but based on the fact that he still hasn't given up a run, would probably indicate that he can maybe take it.
A bit older.
Yeah. And Darren, in your write-up, thank you for doing it. I sort of threw that at you late. That again is running live on site along with this podcast here on Friday. You did write about some hitters. I'm not sure if you just flipped a coin or picked names out of a hat, but if you didn't, please tell me why you wrote about who you did, indicating perhaps some promise or guys worthy of attention.
Yeah. So they both did pretty well. There's not a ton of guys, and they're young. That's another thing. They're both played this year at 17, which is a big deal for doing DSL things. You don't want somebody in your 20s doing well, unless they are a top prospect like Norge Vera. Then that's just kind of confirmation bias. But for these guys, Manuel Garman he was a kind of a slapstick hitter. He just did pretty well. He got a lot of contact, and just you can't only talk about Vera. So here's a guy that just did pretty well. And then Victor Quezada, he was just a guy with big power for the DSL, just a guy to keep a lookout on for big power. He also walked a lot. The only concerning thing for him was that the K rate was near 30%, which is not fantastic for the DSL, but when he got a hold of it, it was going far, or at least a double, sometimes homers. But both of those guys were fine. They didn't really sign a lot of good international prospects besides Vera this year, or I guess Yulki Cespedes as well, but he's much older.
Yeah.
So those 2 guys are really a big bunch ahead of the rest of the people they signed. And you can just look at their stats too. There's really only a few good guys that did pretty well. Even though I think Eloy Jimenez's nephew is on the team. I don't know the family relation on there, but Cesar is there.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's his brother, isn't it? I think that's his little brother, because he used to be, wasn't he Enoy or something? He's the guy who switched his name like a bunch of times. I think that's his brother. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. And believe me, I am not the analyst.
He was
here. I'm
one
not
of the better guys on the team, but it
was a second go around.
But he still wasn't that great. So
Yeah,
just to keep that in mind.
I guess that says a lot. I know Quezada was, I think Garyman was as well, but does it seem to hold in what you have studied with these guys, the guys who get the actual legit bonuses of, six figures? Are those the guys who usually hit the ground running DSL, assuming they start there pretty well, or is it pretty much a crapshoot? And sometimes you get those funny guys who sneak through, like maybe Benjamin Bailey wasn't a big bonus baby guy, but or does it play out pretty well that the guys that the White Sox are tabbing with the bigger money are the guys who are the lead performers, at least early on?
Yeah. So taking out, like Roberts and Vera, the guys that don't get paid millions, but are in the like 100,000, 600,000 range kind of there. Those guys are usually the guys that do better. But it is just honestly a crapshoot there, just because you're sometimes signing people who are actually 16 years old, or even you have agreements when they're younger. And then you just kind of sign them at 16, and these guys are 16, 17. Like, this is basically, I don't want to say high school baseball, but it's kind of like a combination of that freshman high school team and varsity. And then you just kind of take the best players from both. And then you're having 22-year-olds go against 17-year-olds. And sometimes that's just hard to deal with for the 17-year-olds who are a lot less experienced. It's just, I think Garimon and Quezada were both six figures. I think it was low six figures though. So they did much better. But again, they don't sign a ton of guys here. And when they do, it's usually for cheaper after they've signed their top guy. So it's just kind of it's not a great team. And there's a reason why they're one of the teams that don't have two. They don't have enough guys to field two.
I was going to say, Darren, as much as I clamor, this is a clear talking point from the guy who doesn't know what he's talking about, that why don't the White Sox fill out the max number of teams they can? Because it's a very small investment given what it could blossom into, even if it turns out trades, even if it turns out just reputation for your organization. But as we point out year after year, their one team of 46 still isn't really any good. So its second teams is going to be too bad? Or they're going to have an A team and a B team. So the B team wins 0 games and the A team holds its own. I mean, some of this comes down to the White Sox, as much as we always want to champion the drafts and say, oh, it's going to be great and this guy's going to be terrific, that the White Sox still have not proven that they're very good at this. Certainly, I mean, I'm not even talking about it like a Tampa level. They're probably not even average when you look at their scouting that are drafting. Am I being too mean to the White Sox?
No, I mean, when you think about it, their top, free agent signings, international free agent signings are Jose Abreu and Luis Robert, and that's fantastic. But then there's not really anything below that yet.
They didn't have to think about that too much either. They're just like, we want them.
They were paid a lot for a reason, and they were like Luis Robert got the max. I think Jose Abreu was around for before there was a max, but he still got paid tens of millions of dollars. Yeah, like that doesn't happen unless you're supposed to be very good. And obviously, he was Silver Slugger and Rookie of the Year right away. But when you go down from there, it's really been a huge gap. Because you really can't think of many in between those two or going alongside those two. And so now you've got Yolki Cespedes, Gilbert Sanchez, and Norge Vera. That's kind of the next three, and you kind of see what happens with them.
And it's sort of the same thing. I mean, they are picking these guys. They want like veteran guys outside of the United States, which actually it's not a bad strategy at all. It's just, and I know maybe it has to be one or the other, and maybe I would see the logic in that, especially when maybe Oscar Colas is maybe next in line.
Yeah, maybe.
But you'd like to still see. I mean, you still got to fill out the teams. It'd just be nice if they could find guys. It's not as if the White Sox always come to us and say, we were going to sign blank, these top 10 guys, but they took more money. Because the White Sox would, if that was the case, the White Sox would not hesitate to tell us that, because then we'd be like, oh man, they are really on top of it. If they could have signed the top 50 guys in the Dominican League this year, they were on all of them. They don't say that to us, which tells you that they're not on it that way. And that aside from just being able to go, oh yeah, this guy Jose Abreu who's just kicked ass for 8 years in Cuba, let's get him. I'm not sure it gets much deeper or more skilled than that. And that's a little frustrating, even though the top team is so good now. It's still a little frustrating.
Yeah, and again, some of that does play into the Benjamin Bailey not doing well, and other guys not coming over and doing well right away. But I mean, I guess you can count Fernando Tatis as one of the guys they found. But I digress there. Maybe we'd talking about it different if he was still on the team. I don't know.
Sure. You know, it's fine. We're just talking to each other now because everybody just shut it off after you mentioned that name. Yeah. Yeah, in case any of you are sitting at home listening or watching and saying, man, what, these guys are talking like for 40 minutes about the rookie leagues, and now we're talking about the Dominican League. What's up with that? Hey, listen, we got the top 100 prospect list coming. I guarantee you there are going to be Dominican guys in there. Of course, Norje Vera is going to be, who knows? He could be number one for all we know. But there'll be other guys. I would venture to think that in the top 100, Garyman makes it and Quezada might make it. There's going to be some guys from the DSL there. We're going to inform you about them beyond just the way that Darren scratched the surface with them here in this podcast. But there's some point to talking all the way down to the youngest men in the system, in part because there just isn't that much talent right now. It's all in the major leagues and they won one playoff game. So
hey, that was a pretty good win.
It was a good win. Okay. Anyway, I guess we want to wrap this up. This would probably actually roll the credits on the 5, I guess, official end of year reviews. We didn't even think Darren would be here with us for this one. So it's just, this is like bonus Darren Black content. And aren't you all lucky for it? Darren and I are going to be back in a day or two, chatting up the system as a whole. We're going to take a look at what we might consider sort of the all-star team of the organization. So listen for that. And then really, we're going to finally let Darren sleep a little. We don't even know. I don't know. Does Rule 5 get canceled if the winter meetings are canceled? I don't even know what's going on with that, but there may be something to chat about sooner than he thinks, but I'll make sure to yell really loud to the other room and roust him up in plenty of time for him to do a little bit of studying for whatever the next podcast after this next one is going to be. But thanks everybody for listening to number 23. And, keep the playlist hot because we'll have another one here in a day or two where we talk full system and hopefully don't repeat everything we've already said in these other 5. Thanks, Darren. And we will be back with you shortly.